The last thing I wanted to talk about here in Indiana today, and it's sort of a story that straddles the line between a state and national story, is the continued gerrymandering fight. So, as we recall from the last couple weeks, Donald Trump has pressured Republican states to redraw boundaries of their congressional districts in hopes of securing a majority in the face of what looks to be a Republic, or excuse me, a Democratic landslide in next year's House elections. So, starting in Texas, Republicans in the Lone Star State unveiled maps that could net their party an additional 5 seats. But many of the House Democrats there in Texas absconded to Illinois to prevent a quorum, and they did successfully prevent this map from being rammed through in this special section. Governor Greg Abbott did call a second special session immediately afterwards, so we'll see how that goes in Texas. Keep an eye on it. Now, um, we also know that California Governor Gavin Newsom is forwarding redistricting plans in his state to counter the Texas gerrymander, and he announced in a press conference this week that he'll call a November 4th special election so California voters can decide whether to adopt new districts there. Also, last week, Indiana found themselves involved in this scandal, I guess you would say, when Vice President J.D. Vance came here to make a pitch to Mike Braun and Republican legislative leaders about redistricting here in Indiana to steal potentially one or maybe even both of Democrats' House seats here in the Hoosier state. So um, this week, a half dozen Indiana House Democrats went to Chicago to meet with the Texas Democrats who had escaped there to avoid quorum. This So earlier in that day, a nonpartisan election advocate softened their uniform opposition to gerrymandering, saying that they recognized the wide-reaching crisis in our democracy, and Indiana Rep. Ed Delaney likened the efforts to congressional level shoplifting, he said. And I would say that is a fairly accurate statement. So interesting that this is a national nonpartisan election group saying essentially, boy, we've been advocating against gerrymandering this whole time, but if Texas is going to do this gerrymandering, if Indiana, if other red states are going to do this gerrymandering, well, then maybe you have to do some things to even that out. So before we get deeper into the Indiana specific details of this story, any thoughts there? Josh, I think I skipped you the last section.
Yeah, I want everyone to understand very clearly the Republicans in Congress could ban partisan gerrymandering tomorrow, right? This is an issue that is clearly left to it's left to the states initially, but Congress can step in and make rules about this. In 2021, every Democrat in Congress voted for a bill that would ban partisan gerrymandering, and the Republicans blocked it. So, for any Republican that is saying, well, we're just doing this because Illinois did it first. No, if you wanted to stop and fight partisan gerrymandering, you could end all partisan gerrymandering. On top of that, this is one of the most consequential effects of Donald Trump beating Hillary Clinton in 2016. At that time, there were 5 justices on the Supreme Court that were against partisan gerrymandering. They were going to say it was unconstitutional, but it did not get struck down then because then Justice Kennedy said, we don't have a standard to do this by. Basically said, bring me back with the way to judge this, and then we'll rule on it. Of course, then Trump wins, Kennedy retires, and the new Supreme Court rules that partisan gerrymandering is legal. If Hillary Clinton had won that election, right now, partisan gerrymandering would be unconstitutional, and every state would have to draw their lines in a way that did not take into account partisan politics. Every election matters. And when people say both sides are the same, I can't tell the difference, that
Bullshit.
is so false. One side, when they were given the chance in Congress, voted to ban partisan gerrymandering. That would have banned it even in the states that benefited Democrats. The other side, Republicans, only want to ban partisan gerrymandering when it doesn't benefit them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And yes, both sides do gerrymander. Illinois' maps are unexcusable. But I want to say something like 4 Democratic states have highly partisan congressional maps. 11 Republican states, including Indiana, have highly gerrymandered partisan congressional maps. And I think we forget that in this whole discussion, that we've been gerrymandered this whole time. Since 2011, Indiana's maps have been um, comically, comically uneven. Um, Staying on Indiana and our gerrymandered maps. So Trump invited Indiana Republicans to the White House, according to the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. Later this month, uh, Indiana Republicans may be headed to DC to hear a personal pitch from the president why they should redistrict now in contravention of state law. This meeting is a part of a series of meetings the Trump administration is holding with delegations from several states. You know, we're not the only one he's trying to convince to do this. So, in addition to the president, we have other MAGA personalities turning up pressure on Hoosier Republicans, from uh, Intergovernmental Affairs Director Alex Meyer, in his personal capacity, calling several lawmakers here in the state. Turning Point USA personality, influencer, small face guy, Charlie Kirk, said on X, quote, are Indiana House Speaker Todd Houston and Senate President Rod Bray going to ignore President Trump, the majority of their voters, and the GOP grassroots across the country by refusing to redistrict Indiana's congressional seats? Let's hope they are better than that. At the same time, a recent robocall received by a a Politico reporter living in Indiana accuses Democratic governors Gavin Newsom and Kathy Hochul of using redistricting with a goal of ending the Trump presidency, and urging listeners to call GOP state reps to tell them to back the effort. So, like I think that was Tracy was saying, they're going to say, "Whoa, the Democrats, they've gerrymandered these states, so we have to do it first." And like Josh said, that's fundamentally not true. So, listen, I want to end this segment with a little bit of good news, because from the sounds of it, Indiana Republicans at this point are not on board. Former State House Speaker Brian Bosma said, I think it's bad form. I think it's inadvisable. It's probably contrary to Indiana law, and I've expressed my reservation about it to some of our elected leadership. Representative Danny Lopez of Carmel said, just a few years ago, our General Assembly undertook the complex redistricting process on up to date census data, drawing fair maps that ensure every Hoosier vote counts, and we should stand by that work. He's wrong. These maps are not fair, but point taken. Jim Lucas of Seymour, one of the more colorful members of the Indiana state delegation, says, I don't believe Republicans should stoop to the level of Democrats on this issue. Republicans hold about 90% of all local offices statewide, and once the voter rolls get purged of illegals, we will hold an even more commanding lead. Democrats can't compete with their socialist policies and ideology, and if there are seats that need targeted, we should do it the old fashioned way, campaign harder in those districts. Derek, um, I mean, Lucas is right for the wrong reasons. Is that
I mean, I
accurate?
guess you could say that. Um, I mean, me personally, I like our socialist policies. I like having cops on the
Yes.
roads and firefighters and all that. Um, yeah, it's Republicans. Yeah, they may hold 90% of local offices, but that's because we need to get out there better and fight every seat in
Yes.
the elections. That's the only reason they hold that much. So it's partially, our fault as a party not getting people to be on the ticket and fight for the seats. Um, but I, I mean, gerrymandering is stupid no matter what. But
It's cheating. Yeah.
yeah, it's cheating, very much so.
Josh, last thoughts on gerrymandering?
If I can be honest, something feels off because you are right. The Republicans that are coming out against this, that's just not been the MO for the last 5 or 6 years for them, right? Like, they usually just come up with a fake excuse for this. Um, so I can't quite figure out what that is, and I think it boils down to one of 2 things. Indiana has a clause in our constitution that calls for free and fair elections, right? And part of the reason that they did the gerrymanders in the way they did was they were able to at least plausibly put forward enough explanations that said this was not just for a partisan reason, right? This is how we drew the districts. And even though everybody knows that's why they were, right? But you had some sort of evidence you could put in front of the court in that case. Now, with JD Vance and Donald Trump calling for it, like that idea is out the window. So I think maybe there is some concern there from them. But I think the other part, maybe like the only way to make a more district red is to take red voters out of another district. And what they might not realize is based on the 2024 results, yeah, you could probably draw one that has 8 or all 9 Republican seats. But this isn't 2024. And in 2026, if you make 4 congressional seats now, even within 15, 20 points of each other, which sounds pretty red, well, we could be in a recession. People could be tired of, masked federal agents kidnapping people off the streets.
They put a tollway
It's
through.
literally unlimitless the terrible things that are going on, right? And I think there might be some recognition on their part that Indiana's not as red as they think it is.
I
And
think
they're
that's
not going to
exactly
be
it.
able to get 8 or 9 seats in 2026. And so this might actually be a recognition of the strength of Democratic voters in Indiana.
Yeah, they might be as gerrymandered as they can get, and they can't do it any further without diluting some of their power.
Right.
Tracy, I have a potential third reason why they don't want to do this, and that is they don't want to have to come back and work during a special session.
I think you're right. But I think Josh has hit it right there. I know that we spent a lot of time I talked to some people about this up here in CD1 because ours is one of the targeted seats. And that has been the consensus with everyone I've spoken with is that when you look at each map and each voting district at a granular level, Indiana is far more purple than anybody ever really truly believes. And you don't see that until you get down to the city and each individual municipality and each household. So as they get into the granular details of which is what redistricting is, Republicans don't want to put other seats in danger, um, which is what they're going to do. And there's just it's too close to make it really worth the effort.
Yes, Derek. Last word before we move on.
And I think they're really worried about District 5 because that one was the closest out of all the red districts that could have fallen in 24. So I think they're really looking at District 5 as a potential flip.
Yeah, they probably can't borrow any of those voters from Victoria Sparks district without her taking the L next time around. Good point, Derek.